The emergency sirens had been wailing for 3 hours when Zara Thorne finally decided to ignore protocol and venture into the lower archives. The citywide contamination alert meant everyone should shelter in place, but the backup generators were failing and someone needed to secure the historical data servers before they corrupted completely. Zara pulled her respirator mask tighter as she descended. The metal stairs into the forgotten subway tunnels that housed the oldest archives. The air smelled of rust and stagnant water, and her footsteps echoed in the darkness beyond her flashlight beam. She had worked at the Central Data Repository for 6 years, but she'd only been down here twice before, both times with a full maintenance crew. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the tiled walls, remnants from when this had been part of the city's transport system decades ago. Now it served as climate-controlled storage for documents too old or fragile for digitization. Zara moved quickly between the server racks, checking connections and running diagnostics on her handheld device. That's when she heard a soft cough, barely audible above the hum of the cooling systems. Zara froze. The tunnels were supposed to be empty. She listened intently, heart hammering, then heard it again, a wet, painful sound that spoke of illness or exhaustion. She followed the sound deeper into the tunnel, past the last row of servers, to where the maintenance corridor branched off into darkness. Her light swept across old construction equipment and abandoned workstations until it landed on a figure huddled behind a defunct air filtration unit. The woman was young, maybe mid-20s, with short dark hair plastered to her skull with sweat. Her clothes were layers of mismatched fabric, all of it worn and dirty. She squinted against Zara's flashlight, raising a thin hand to shield her eyes. "Please," the woman whispered, her voice hoarse. "I'm not stealing anything. I just needed somewhere dry." Zara lowered the light, her mind racing. The contamination. Protocols were clear: no unauthorized personnel, no exceptions. But looking at this woman, she saw exhaustion so deep it seemed carved into her bones. "How long have you been down here?" Zara asked quietly. 3 days, maybe 4. The woman's eyes darted toward the tunnel entrance. The alert started, and everyone evacuated the upper levels. I thought no one would check down here." "Your name? Ivy? Ivy Chen?" She coughed again, the sound echoing off the tunnel walls. "I used to work in the filing department upstairs, before the budget cuts." Zara remembered the layoffs from 18 months ago. Hundreds of administrative workers had been let go when the city digitized most of its record-keeping. She'd been lucky to keep her technical position. But she'd watched good people pack their desks and disappear into an economy that had no place for them. "Ivy," Zara said carefully, "the contamination readings are getting worse. These tunnels aren't safe for extended shelter." Ivy's face crumpled. "I know, but there's nowhere else. The shelters are full, and they check ID now. They know about the eviction notices, the unpaid fines. I can't." She stopped, pressing her lips together. Zara looked back toward the servers, their status lights blinking steadily in the gloom. She thought about the apartment waiting for her 20 floors above, with its climate control and stocked refrigerator. She thought about the protocols that said she should report this immediately and let security handle it. Instead, she knelt down beside Ivy and unzipped her work jacket. "Here," she said, offering it. "It's clean, and it has reflective lining. Better insulation." Ivy stared at her. "You're not calling security?" "Not yet," Zara said. "But we need to get you somewhere safer than this. The air quality down here will only get worse." She stood and extended her hand. After a long moment, Ivy took it, her palm cold and slightly damp. Zara helped her to her feet, noting how she swayed slightly. "My apartment has a guest room," Zara heard herself say. "It's small, but it's warm and it's legal shelter during an emergency." Ivy's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you?" "Because I've been where you are," Zara said simply. "Different circumstances, but the same feeling of having nowhere to go." They walked back through the tunnel together, Ivy leaning slightly on Zara's arm. The servers hummed around them, preserving the city's history while 2 women wrote a new chapter of their own. Marcus Reed was replacing a broken heating unit in the basement when he heard the scratching. It was barely audible over the building's ancient boiler. But his military training had taught him to notice sounds that didn't belong. He sat down. His wrenchin listened, head tilted toward the utility corridor that ran behind the mechanical room. The December storm outside had knocked out power to half the district, and the temperature was dropping fast. Marcus had been working overtime to keep the old apartment building's systems running, knowing that most of his elderly tenants couldn't afford to go anywhere else if the heat failed. The scratching came again, metal on concrete. Desperate and rhythmic. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and followed the sound to a maintenance crawl space he rarely checked. Someone had pulled away the metal grating that covered the entrance. He crouched down and shined his light inside. A figure pressed against the far wall, arms wrapped around drawn-up knees. It was a man, probably early 30s, with sandy hair and a face marked by old scars that spoke of violence survived rather than sought. His clothes were soaked through from the storm, and Marcus could see him shivering uncontrollably. Marcus said softly, the way he'd learned to approach wounded soldiers. "You hurt?" The man's head snapped up, eyes wide with the kind of alertness that came from sleeping rough. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I know I shouldn't be here. I was just trying to get warm. I'll leave." He started to crawl toward the opening, but Marcus noticed the way he favored his left side, the careful way he moved his right arm. "Hold on," Marcus said. "You're injured. It's nothing." Old injury, acting up in the cold? The man paused halfway out of the crawl space. "I used to live here, apartment 4B. Before, ... Marcus recognized the unit number. The previous tenant had been evicted 6 months ago for missed rent payments. He'd seen the man once or twice in the hallways, quiet, polite, always nodded when they passed. "Nathan, right?" Marcus said, remembering the name from the lease files. Nathan's shoulders sagged. "You remember? Hard to forget someone who always held the elevator for my toolbox." Marcus extended his hand. "Come on out of there. Let's get you warmed up." Nathan hesitated. "Don't have money for rent." "I can't pay you back." "Did I ask for money?" Marcus helped him out of the crawl space, noting the way Nathan winced when his weight shifted. "When's the last time you ate?" "Tuesday, I think." Nathan swayed slightly on his feet. "Maybe Monday." Marcus felt something familiar twist in his chest, the same protective instinct that had gotten him in trouble during his last deployment. When he'd broken orders to carry wounded civilians to safety, the Army had called it failure to maintain appropriate emotional distance. Marcus called it being human. "My apartment's on the first floor," he said. "Comes with a maintenance job. I've got hot coffee and leftover soup." Nathan's face went through a series of expressions: hope, suspicion, desperate gratitude. "Why would you help me?" Marcus thought about the nightmares that still woke him. About the VA counselor who'd asked him the same question about accepting help. "'Cause everyone deserves a warm place to sleep when it's cold enough to kill." They walked through the basement together, Nathan moving slowly but steadily. The apartment was small and sparse, military neat, with few personal belongings, but it was warm, and the smell of the soup he'd made earlier still lingered in the air. "Sit," Marcus said, pointing to the couch. "I'll heat up some food." Nathan lowered himself carefully onto the cushions, his whole body seeming to collapse. With relief, Marcus busied himself in the kitchen, ladling soup into a bowl and starting fresh coffee. He kept glancing over, noting the way Nathan's eyes darted between the door and the windows, the hyper-vigilance of someone who'd learned that safety was temporary. "You military?" Nathan asked when Marcus handed him the bowl. "Was 3 tours overseas?" Marcus sat in the chair across from him. "You 6 years Army Reserve? Got called up twice?" Nathan took a spoonful of soup, his hands shaking slightly. "This is good. Really good." They ate in comfortable silence, the storm rattling the windows outside. Marcus watched Nathan gradually relax, his shoulders dropping, his breathing evening out. The apartment felt different with another person in it, less like a place to hide and more like a home. "I lost my job," Nathan said suddenly. "Closure. Then I couldn't make rent, couldn't find work fast enough. Pride kept me from asking for help until it was too late." Marcus nodded. "Pride's expensive, yeah." Nathan met his eyes. "I know what it's like to come back and not fit anywhere. To feel like you're broken in ways people can't see." "You're not broken," Marcus said quietly. "You're just carrying weight you shouldn't have to carry alone." Nathan's throat worked as he swallowed hard. I don't know how to repay this. You don't repay kindness, Marcus said. You pass it on when you can. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, two men who understood the weight of invisible wounds shared warmth and the beginning of something neither had expected to find again: hope. Alina Vasquez pushed her cleaning cart through the empty corridors of St. Mary's Medical Center, her footsteps muffled by the industrial carpet. It was 2:30 a.m. and the hospital had settled into its nighttime rhythm, the soft beeping of monitors, the distant hum of ventilators, the occasional page over the intercom. She'd been working the night shift for 8 years. Invisible to most of the day staff, but essential to keeping the hospital running. Alina loved these quiet hours. There was something peaceful about moving through the halls when most of the world was asleep, taking care of spaces where healing happened. She took pride in her work, ensuring every surface was clean, every room ready for the next patient who might need it. She was heading toward the loading dock to empty her trash when she heard a soft whimpering, like an animal in pain. Alina paused, listening. The sound came again, definitely human. Coming from the direction of the loading bay, Alina left her cart and walked carefully toward the back of the hospital. A fumble sound of At night it was empty, except for the large dumpsters and shipping containers. She pushed open the heavy door and stepped into the cold night air. At first, she saw nothing. Then movement caught her eye. Someone huddled behind one of the large waste containers, trying to stay out of the wind that whipped through the loading area. "Hello?" Alina called softly. "Are you all right?" The figure tensed, and Alina could make out a woman, maybe 50 years old, wearing multiple layers of clothing that looked like they'd been collected from different sources. Her graying hair was tied back with what looked like a piece of torn fabric, and her face was weathered by too many nights outdoors. "I'm not causing trouble," the woman said quickly. "I was just trying to get out of the wind. I'll move along," Alina said, stepping closer. "Are you hurt?" The woman looked up, and Alina could see exhaustion etched deep in her features. "Just tired. Been walking since the shelter closed for cleaning. Thought I could rest here until morning." Alina knew about the shelter closure's budget cuts had reduced operating hours, leaving people with nowhere to go during the coldest part of the night. She also knew hospital policy about unauthorized persons on the premises. But looking at this woman, she saw her own mother's face from years ago, when they'd been evicted and spent 3 nights sleeping in their car. "What's your name?" Alina asked. "Rose Martinez?" The woman's voice was hoarse, probably from the cold. "I know I shouldn't be here. Hospital security probably doesn't like security, doesn't patrol this area until 6 a.m., Alina said quietly. "And it's going to get colder before dawn." Rose studied her face, trying to read her intentions. "You work here? Night custodial staff? I keep the place clean." Alina looked around the loading dock, thinking. There's a break room in the basement. Staff use it during shifts, but it's empty overnight. It has heat, a couch, and a coffee machine. Rose's eyes widened. "You'd let me... I'd let you get warm," Alina said simply. "Everyone deserves that." She led Rose through a service entrance, down a flight of stairs to the basement level where the staff facilities were located. The break room was small but comfortable, with a few tables, a worn couch, and a kitchenette. Alina turned on the lights and checked the coffee machine. "Bathrooms down the hall," she said. There are clean towels in the supply closet if you want to wash up. Rose stood in the doorway, looking overwhelmed. Why are you doing this? Lena busied herself making coffee, remembering her mother's tears the night they'd been turned away from 3 different shelters because they were full. Because sometimes we all need someone to see us as human. I'm not a charity case, Rose said, but there was no anger in it, just the need to preserve some dignity. I know, Alina said. My mother raised 3 kids after my father left. Worked 2 jobs and still couldn't always make rent. We ended up sleeping in the car more than once. She handed Rose a steaming cup. Charity is when someone gives you something you don't deserve. This is just people taking care of people. Rose accepted the coffee, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. I used to be a teacher. 23 years in elementary school. Then the district made cuts, and at my age, nobody wanted to hire someone so close to retirement. You still are a teacher, Alina said. Just because you lost a job doesn't mean you lost who you are. Rose's eyes filled with tears. It feels like I lost everything. Not everything, Alina said gently. You're here, you're breathing. Tomorrow is still possible. Alina excused herself to continue her rounds, checking on Rose every hour or so. Each time she found the older woman looking a little more human color, returning to her cheeks, her posture less defensive. They talked quietly during Elena's breaks, sharing stories about their children, their dreams, the small victories that kept them going. As dawn approached, Elena helped Rose gather her belongings. There's a day program at the community center. On 5th Street, she said. They help with job placement, housing assistance, good people. Rose nodded, then surprised Elena by hugging her. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for letting me help, Elena replied. As Rose walked away into the early morning light, Elena felt something shift inside her chest. Her work had always been about cleaning, about maintaining spaces for others. But tonight, she'd learned that sometimes the most important maintenance was taking care of the human spirit. David Kim had been lighthouse keeper for 12 years, and he'd learned to read the moods of the ocean like other people read faces. Tonight the waves were angry, slamming against the rocky coastline with a violence that made his lighthouse tower sway. Despite its century-old stone foundation, the storm had been building for 2 days, and now it was unleashing its full fury on the remote stretch of Maine coast that David called home. He climbed the winding stairs to the light chamber, checking the beacon's rotation for the 4th time. In an hour, no ships should be out in this weather, but David had learned never to assume anything about the sea. It took what it wanted and gave back only what it chose. The radio crackled with Coast Guard chatter emergency channels reporting 12-foot swells and winds gusting to 70 miles per hour. David adjusted the lighthouse beam, its powerful ray cutting through sheets of rain that hammered the windows like bullets. That's when he saw it. A piece of debris, larger than the usual driftwood, tumbling in the surf about 200 yards. Offshore, David grabbed his binoculars and focused through the rain. It wasn't debris. It was part of a small boat. It's maybe a fishing vessel or pleasure craft that had been caught by the storm, and there was someone clinging to it. David didn't hesitate, grabbed his emergency gear and ran down the lighthouse stairs. Fighting against the wind to reach the equipment shed, his rescue boat was small but sturdy, designed for coastal emergencies. He'd used it twice before to pull people from the water, and he knew these rocks and currents better than anyone. The launch was brutal. Waves crashed over the bow as David fought to keep the boat pointed into the swells. The person in the water was barely visible now, a dark shape against the white foam. David pushed the engine harder. Knowing that every second in water this cold reduced the chances of survival, he reached the debris field just as a massive wave lifted his boat like a toy. When it dropped back down, he was close enough to see her carry a young woman, maybe 25. Dark hair plastered to her skull, arms wrapped around what looked like a cooler that was keeping her afloat. I'm coming, David shouted over the wind, though he doubted she could hear him. Getting her into the boat took 3 attempts. Each time he got close, another wave would push them apart. On the 4th try, he managed to grab her arm and haul her over the side, both of them tumbling into the bottom of the boat as a wave crashed over them. She was unconscious, her skin blue-white with cold. David wrapped her in emergency blankets and turned the boat back toward shore. fighting the waves that seemed determined to claim them both. The trip back to the lighthouse took 20 minutes that felt like hours. By the time David got her inside, hypothermia had set in. He carried her to the living quarters beneath the light chamber, where a wood stove kept the small space warm against the coastal chill. David had been a Navy medic before becoming a lighthouse keeper. The training came back automatically. He stripped off her wet clothes, wrapped her in dry blankets, and started warming her core temperature gradually. Her pulse was weak, but steady. Her breathing shallow, but regular. It took an hour before she started, shivering, a good sign that her body was trying to warm itself. Another hour before her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. Where? ... double quotes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You're safe, David said quietly. You're at Beacon Point Lighthouse. Pulled you from the water. She tried to sit up, but David gently pressed her back down. Easy. You've been in the water for a while. Your body needs time to recover. My boat, she said, memory returning. The engine died, and the waves. I thought I was going to die. What's your name? Jenna. Jenna Ross. She looked around the small room, stone walls, simple furniture, the steady beam of the lighthouse rotating overhead. How long was I out there? Hard to say. When did your boat go down? This afternoon, I think. I was fishing off Gull Rock. When the storm hit, she shivered despite the blankets. I've never been so scared in my life. David nodded, understanding. He'd seen what the ocean could do to people, how it could strip away everything except the pure need to survive. You're a local fisherman? Part-time? I work at the marina in Millbridge. Take tourists out on fishing charters during the season? Jenna's eyes filled with tears. That boat was everything I had. My grandfather's boat. He built it himself 50 years ago. David felt the familiar ache of loss. He'd left his own family's fishing business to take this isolated job driven by ghosts that still haunted his sleep. I'm sorry about your boat. You saved my life, Jenna said simply. That matters more than wood and fiberglass. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the storm rage outside. David made hot soup and strong coffee, and Jenna told him about growing up on the coast, about learning to fish from her grandfather, about the struggle to keep the family business alive in an economy that didn't value small-scale fishing anymore. Why lighthouse keeping? She asked eventually. David stared into the fire in the wood stove. I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere useful. The lighthouse keeps people safe without me having to. ... double quotes. He trailed off.
Having to what?
Having to be responsible for anyone else's life? He said quietly. I was a medic in Afghanistan. I lost people I was supposed to save. When I came back, I couldn't handle the weight of other people depending on me. Jenna studied his face in the firelight. But you saved me. That's different. That was just ... what you do when someone's drowning. Is it? She asked gently. David looked at her, this woman he'd pulled from the sea, who was alive because he'd overcome his fear of responsibility long enough to act. For the first time in years, saving someone had felt like healing rather than reopening old wounds. Maybe, he said finally. Outside, the storm began to ease, but inside the lighthouse, two people who had been lost in different ways had found something unexpected. The possibility that saving others might be the first step toward saving themselves. Grace Miller had always believed that libraries were sanctuaries, but she never expected to find someone treating hers quite so literally. It was 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, 30 minutes before the Millbrook Public Library opened, when she discovered the young man asleep between the biography shelves in the back reading room. Grace paused in the doorway, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. The man looked to be in his early 20s, curled on his side on the worn carpet, using a backpack as a pillow. His clothes were clean but patched, and his dark hair fell across. A face that carried the sharp angles of someone who'd been hungry more often than not. She should call the police. That was protocol, but something about the careful way he'd positioned himself hidden from the main entrance. Not disturbing. Any books made her hesitate. Grace had been head librarian for 15 years, and she'd learned to distinguish between people who meant harm and people who simply needed help. She approached quietly, noting the pile of books beside him, a GED study guide, computer programming manual, and a battered copy of Mice and Men. When she was close enough, she cleared her throat softly. The young man's eyes snapped open immediately, alert in the way that came from sleeping in unsafe places. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing his backpack. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I know I'm not supposed to be here after hours. I'll leave. I won't come back." "Hold on," Grace said gently. "What's your name?" He hesitated, clearly weighing whether honesty would help or hurt him. "Tommy. Tommy Walsh." "Well, Tommy, I'm Grace Miller. I run this library." She studied his face, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the way his clothes hung loose on his thin frame. "How long have you been sleeping here?" "Just twice," he said quickly. "I waited until you locked up, then slipped in through the basement window that doesn't latch properly. Didn't take anything, didn't break anything, just needed somewhere safe and warm." Grace felt something shift in her chest. In her 20 years working in public service, she'd seen countless people use the library as an unofficial shelter elderly folks, killing time between meals, students with nowhere else to study, homeless individuals seeking refuge from the elements. But Tommy was the first to actually move in. "Where have you been staying before this?" she asked. "Different places. The youth hostel when I had money, but that ran out last week. I aged out of foster care 6 months ago." He shouldered his backpack, preparing to leave. "I've been trying to find work, but most places want an address, references, that kind of thing." Grace looked at the books he'd been reading, at the notebook filled with what looked like careful handwriting and math problems. "You're studying for your GED?" "Yeah. I was supposed to graduate last year, but I had to leave school when my foster placement fell through." Tommy's jaw tightened. "I just need to get stable first." Grace made a decision that would have seemed impossible an hour earlier. "Tommy, what would you say to a deal?" He looked at her suspiciously. "What kind of deal? The library needs help." "Budget cuts mean I can't hire a full-time assistant. But there's plenty of work shelving books, helping with computer classes. General maintenance. It doesn't pay much, but it comes with something you need." "What's that?" "It's a small apartment above the library. It used to be storage, but it has a bathroom, a kitchenette, and enough space for a bed. The town council has been talking about renting it out, but they haven't gotten around to it." Grace smiled. "I think I could convince them that having a live-in caretaker would be good for security." Tommy stared at her, his expression cycling through disbelief, hope, and wariness. "Why would you do that for me?" Grace thought about her own story, how she'd dropped out of college when her mother got sick, how the previous librarian had given her a chance despite her lack of credentials, how one person's faith had changed the entire trajectory of her life. "Because everyone deserves a chance to build something," she said simply. "And because you've already shown respect for this place. You could have damaged property, caused problems. Instead, you read books and studied for your future." Tommy's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to repay something like that." "You repay it by proving I was right to trust you," Grace said, "and by helping the next person who needs a chance." 3 hours later, after Grace had made calls to the town council and explained the situation, Tommy was moving his few belongings into the small apartment upstairs. It wasn't much a studio space with slanted ceilings and windows that looked out over the town square, but it was his. That afternoon, Grace watched him shelve returned books, with the careful attention of someone who understood the value of what he'd been given. Several patrons commented on the polite young man who helped them find what they were looking for, who listened carefully to their questions and went out of his way to be helpful. "You know," said Mrs. Henderson, regular patron who'd been coming to the library for 30 years, "it's nice to see someone who appreciates books the way they should be appreciated." Grace smiled, watching Tommy explain the computer catalog. System 2, an elderly gentleman who was trying to find books about gardening. Sometimes sanctuary wasn't just about having a safe place to sleep. Sometimes it was about finding somewhere you could grow into the person you were meant to become. That evening, as Grace locked up the library, she could see light in the upstairs window where Tommy was studying. The building felt different, somehow less like a place where she worked alone and more like a true community center, a place where lives could be rebuilt, one chapter at a time. She thought about the books Tommy had been reading, about the careful notes in his notebook, about the way his face had changed when she'd offered him not just shelter but purpose. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd talk to him about applying for college scholarships. After all, that's what libraries were for, helping people write their next chapter.